My name is Vreth, and I want it noted, for the official record of the Galactic Interspecies Academy, that I tried to warn them. I tried. Nobody listened. They rarely listen to a Quarath, because we are small, and our scales are the color of old mud, and our threat assessment scores are, shall we say, politely terrible. But I was there. I saw the human smile. And I am telling you from the deepest part of my four-chambered heart, that smile was not a friendly thing. It started, as most catastrophic events in galactic history do, with a meeting. Director Keltu, the Pelthian administrator of the Multiversal Academy of Yolan Station, called a full assembly of all enrolled species, 1,412 students from 39 different species, crammed into the Grand Lecture Bowl on Level 7. The bowl smelled like 6 different kinds of atmospheric gas, and the acoustics were, as always, a disaster. The species sitting near the top kept complaining they could not hear. The species sitting at the bottom kept complaining the ones at the top smelled like ammonia. It was, in other words, a perfectly normal assembly, right up until Director Keltu cleared his throat, adjusted his ceremonial sash, and said the words that would change everything. Effective immediately, he announced. All weapons, tools of personal combat, or items classified under Category 7 threat designation are hereby banned from all common areas, dormitories, classrooms, and recreational zones of this academy. There was silence. Then there was noise. The Drathaki students, who kept ceremonial bone blades strapped to their upper thorax for religious reasons, began clicking their mandibles in furious protest. The Velori contingent, who wore gravitational compression gauntlets as a fashion statement, started shouting. The Moonthi exchange students, who technically were weapons, being ambulatory colonies of acid-secreting microorganisms, seemed personally offended, and then, from Section 12, Row 3, one of the 3 human students raised a hand. Her name was Petra. I know this because I had been sitting 2 rows behind her for 6 standard months, studying xenobiology, and she had never once done anything that worried me. She was quiet. She took notes in a small paper book, which was already strange, because paper was practically mythological. She ate her meals quickly, and spent the rest of her free time in the library. She smiled sometimes, but it was the small, polite kind, the kind that means nothing dangerous. That day she raised her hand, and Director Keltu, probably relieved that at least one student was not screaming or secreting acid, pointed to her. Yes, Miss Was. Sir, she said pleasantly. Just to confirm, all weapons are banned? Correct. Category 7 and above? All categories, yes. She nodded, slowly. She wrote something in her paper book, and then she smiled. That was the smile I am talking about. It was not large, it was not theatrical, it did not show all her teeth, which, and I want to be specific here, is 40% more teeth than any species at this academy possesses, which is already alarming enough. No, it was a small smile, a quiet smile. The kind of smile that, if you were from Earth, probably looked like mild satisfaction. The kind of smile you might give when someone tells you that a road you already know an alternate route for has been closed. I looked at that smile and something very old in my Quarath brain, something that had kept my ancestors alive on the swamp plains of Quarath 4 for 900,000 years, said run. I did not run. I was in the middle of a row. The assembly dismissed. The week continued. Weapons were collected at the station entrance gate, with much grumbling, much formal protests filed by 17 different cultural liaisons, and one extremely tense standoff with the Muntha collective that required 3 mediators and a philosophical debate about whether a student could be considered their own weapon. The ruling for the record was complicated, but here is what I noticed. Here is what nobody else seemed to notice. Petra handed in nothing. She walked through the collection gate, she nodded at the security officers, and she went to class. She had, to all appearances, no weapons to surrender. She was a human, she was small, she wore grey clothing, and carried a satchel full of textbooks, and that small paper book. The security officers smiled at her, because humans have this effect on most species. They are not particularly large. They are not particularly armored. They do not secrete acid or vibrate at dangerous frequencies. They look, in the grand taxonomy of galactic life, almost comically unthreatening. So nobody searched her bag. I would have searched the bag, but I am Quarath, and we were described in the official Academy welcome guide as a timid and overly cautious species notable for their survival instinct, which is, while impressive on their home world, somewhat excessive in a structured academic environment. Excessive. Right. I watched Petra was. I am not saying I was following her. I was simply, frequently in the same locations. The library, the cafeteria, the observation deck on level 12 where you could watch the slow rotation of the station's outer ring against the stars. She went there every Thursday evening. She would sit with a cup of something that smelled terrible and steamed enthusiastically, stare out at the stars and write in her book. One Thursday, I sat near her, not directly next to her, 3 seats away, which is a comfortable observational distance for a Quarath of my height. She glanced over. She nodded. I nodded. We stared at stars for a while. "You keep watching me," she said, without looking away from the viewport. My scales, which cannot technically turn red, did their best approximation of it. "I apologize," I said. "I am not attempting to cause offense." "None taken," she said. "You're the Quarath from xenobiology, right?" "Vreth?" "Yes." "And I'm Petra." "I know." She looked at me then. She had these eyes that were a particular shade of brown that exists, apparently, on only a very specific part of Earth's visible spectrum. They were sharp eyes, assessment eyes, the kind of eyes that were doing something behind them that the rest of the face was not showing. "You're worried about something," she said. "I am frequently worried about things," I said. "It is a defining characteristic of my species." She smiled, not the predator smile, a different one, a smaller one. A human being finding something genuinely amusing and being polite about showing it. "You handed in your weapons," I said before I could stop myself. "I don't carry weapons," she said. "You handed in nothing at the gate." "That's because I don't carry weapons." I looked at her. She looked at me. The stars continued their indifferent rotation outside. "Miss Wass," I said, carefully, "I mean no cultural insult, but humans are the only species in known space who developed not 1, not 2, but 14 distinct categories of weapons before developing interstellar travel. Your species' primary approach to environmental challenges has historically been, and I am quoting the Xenobiological Survey here, to hit the environment until it changes its behavior." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very accurate summary," she said. "You have no weapons." "I told you, I don't carry weapons. The security officers believed you?" "Most people do," she said. She took a sip of her terrible steaming drink. "Vreth, can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What's a weapon?" I stared at her. The Category 7 classification covers any tool or item designed primarily for the purpose of causing physical harm or coercion to another living or constructed entity. "Designed primarily," she said. "Interesting wording." She pulled out her paper book and wrote something in it. I went back to my dormitory that night and filed an informal concern report with the Academy's Student Safety Office. It was my 3rd such report. The first had been about the ventilation system near the Drathaki housing unit, which was genuinely a fire hazard. The second had been about a Valori student who I was fairly certain was operating an unlicensed gravitational compression device in the gymnasium. The third was about Petra Wass and what she had said about the word designed. The safety officer, a bored Chellerite named Osson, read my report, looked up at me, and said, "So to confirm, your concern is that a human student does not have weapons. My concern is why she is not concerned that she does not have weapons." Osson stared at me. "Vreth," he said gently, "humans without weapons aren't dangerous. They're just short." I left his office. Here is something the Galactic Survey of Sentient Species notes about Quarath, which I feel deserves more attention than it typically receives. Our home world of Quara 4 is classified as a death world, Category 3. This means it is a planet on which, statistically, most arriving species will not survive long enough to file a complaint about it. Quara 4 has, among other things, 17 apex predators, 3 of which can change their molecular density, a fungal network in the southern continent that is technically sentient and extremely territorial, and weather systems that have been described by visiting geologists as personally hostile. We survived it. All of us, every living Quarath, is descended from ancestors who looked at that planet every single morning and correctly identified which thing was going to try to kill them today. We are not paranoid. We are experienced. And my experience told me, clearly and without ambiguity, that Petra Wass, sitting on that observation deck with her steaming drink and her paper book, was not a harmless girl without weapons. She was a harmless-looking girl who had thought very carefully about the word designed. 3 days later, the incident began. It did not begin dramatically. It never does, in my experience. It began on a Tuesday morning in the hallway outside the main cafeteria, when a group of Grethani upperclassmen decided that a first-year Pelori student named Odin Chef owed them a debt. The Grethani are large. They average 2.5 meters. They are covered in dense subdermal plating, and they have 6 functional limbs, the upper 2 of which end in appendages that function as both hands and, in a pinch, as things you very much do not want to be struck by. There were 4 of them. There was one of Odin. Odin was Pelori, which meant she was roughly the size of a large house cat by Earth standards, had luminescent patches along her spine that were currently flashing a very anxious purple, and was pressing herself against the cafeteria wall in a way that suggested she was attempting to become part of it. I was watching from the corridor junction, 12 meters away, because I had turned the corner and immediately assessed the situation and stopped moving. Most of the other students in the hallway were also watching. Most of them were watching the way that people watch things they are not sure they should get involved in, which is to say, they were watching while simultaneously positioning themselves to leave quickly if necessary. Then Petra came around the corner from the other direction. She was carrying her satchel. She was wearing grey. She had her paper book tucked under one arm. She looked at the 4 Grethani surrounding Odin, and she stopped walking. One of the Grethani, the largest one, whose name I later learned was Brooke, turned to look at her. "Keep moving, little one," he said. The translator rendered his tone as casual dismissal. Petra looked at Odin. She looked at Brock. She looked at the other 3 Grethani. She looked at the 30-odd students watching from a safe distance, and then she looked back at Brock. And she smiled. That smile. "No," she said, pleasantly, "I don't think I will." Brooke made a sound that the translator rendered as amused contempt. "You're going to stop us? You're a human. You don't even have weapons." Petra tilted her head. It was a very small movement, a very precise movement. The movement of something that had just been told something it found interesting. "That's right," she said. "I don't have weapons." She set her satchel down. She set her paper book down on top of it. She rolled up the sleeves of her grey shirt, very methodically, to just below the elbow. She straightened up. She looked at Brock the way that a person looks at a math problem they have already solved, and are now merely waiting to demonstrate. "I just have hands," she said. The hallway went very, very quiet. Somewhere behind me, I heard another student whisper to their companion, "Wait, aren't humans the ones who used to fight each other? Like, for sport?" "Yes," their companion whispered back. "Voluntarily? Apparently. For entertainment?" A pause. "One of their most popular modern sports is 2 of them standing in a small area and hitting each other until one can't continue." Another pause. "Is that classified as a weapon? The hands?" I thought about what Petra had said to me on the observation deck. "Designed primarily—" "Oh no. I want to be clear about something, before I continue. I, Vreth, have studied xenobiology for 4 academic years. I have read 312 peer-reviewed papers on human physiology, human history, and human behavioral patterns. I have sat through 12 mandatory cross-cultural sensitivity seminars hosted by the Academy, all of which described humans as, quote, a socially adaptable, moderately fragile, emotionally complex species that responds well to diplomatic engagement and should be approached with patience and warmth. Moderately fragile. I would like to find whoever wrote that and have a very serious conversation with them, because what happened next in that hallway was not fragile, it was not moderate, it was in fact the single most efficiently terrifying 3 minutes and 42 seconds I have ever personally witnessed, and I grew up on a planet where the rain sometimes contains parasites. Brooke, the lead Grethani, laughed. It was a big laugh, the kind that fills a hallway and makes smaller students lean back involuntarily. He had 400 kilograms of subdermal plating, 6 limbs, and the natural confidence of a creature who had never in his life encountered something smaller than him, that did not immediately reconsider its choices. He stepped forward. Petra did not step back. She shifted her weight, very slightly, to her back foot. Her hands came up, loose and easy, the way a door swings open without effort. Her chin dropped maybe 2 centimeters. Her eyes stayed exactly where they were, fixed on Brooke, with the focused calm of someone reading a document they have already memorized. Brooke swung. Now, a Grethani strike is not a subtle thing. It involves a limb approximately the diameter of a young tree moving at considerable speed, and it lands with the kind of impact that rearranges whatever it meets at a structural level. I have seen Grethani sparring matches. I once watched one accidentally knock a support column loose in the gymnasium. The support column was rated for 800 standard kilotons of lateral force. Petra was not there when it arrived. I do not mean she dodged gracefully. I mean she was simply suddenly not in the location the strike was aimed at. She had moved, but the movement was so economical, so unremarkable in its execution, that it took my brain a full half-second to process that it had happened at all. She had slipped sideways and slightly forward, and now she was closer to Brooke than she had been before, which was the opposite of what any sensible creature would choose to be. What followed happened faster than I am honestly able to narrate in real time, so I will do my best. She hit him, not where his plating was thickest, not where any sensible creature would hit a Grethany, which is nowhere, because the correct strategy with a Grethany is to be elsewhere. She hit the joint, the gap between the upper chest plating and the neck plating, the narrow band of softer connective tissue that exists in every armored species because evolution always leaves a seam somewhere, and apparently humans know where every seam is on every species because of course they do. They have spent their entire civilizational history finding seams. Brooke made a sound I will not attempt to describe. His second limb came around. She was not there. She was lower, and her elbow connected with the back of his knee joint, which in Grethany anatomy bends the wrong way to accept force from that direction, and Brooke, 400 kilograms of him, went down on one knee with a crash that I felt through the floor. The other three Grethani moved. Petra turned to face all three of them with an expression that I can only describe as mild professional interest. The kind of expression a technician wears when three machines malfunction simultaneously and they are mentally sorting the order in which to address them. "You can stop," she said, conversationally. "He is fine, he will be sore, nothing is permanently damaged, but I want you to think, carefully, about whether you want to continue." They did not stop. I will spare the detailed account because this is an academic record and not a combat manual, but the relevant summary is, they should have stopped. The whole thing lasted 3 minutes and 42 seconds, by my internal chronometer. At the end of it, all four Grethani were on the floor in various states of reconsidering their life choices. None of them was seriously hurt. I checked, afterward, because I am thorough. Bruised joints, wounded pride, and one case of what the medical report later described as significant psychological recalibration. Brooke, specifically, sat on the floor for a long time after it ended, staring at his own hands, with the expression of a creature who has just discovered that the universe contains categories of experience it had not previously considered. Petra straightened up. She smoothed her grey shirt. She walked back to where she had set her satchel and her paper book, picked them up, and looked at Odin, who was still pressed against the wall with her luminescent patches now flashing a stunned, flickering white. "You okay?" Petra asked. Odin made a small sound that the translator identified as, "Technically, yes." "Good." Petra smiled. The small, polite smile, the safe one. "Come on, I'll walk you to class." The hallway remained completely silent until they had turned the corner and disappeared. Then everyone started talking at once. I did not talk. I wrote in my mental notes, which I later transcribed to my official report. I wrote, "Hypothesis confirmed." The word "designed" was doing a great deal of work. Because here is the thing. Here is the thing that everyone in that hallway was slowly, visibly, painfully realizing as they stood there and processed what they had just seen. Petra had no weapons. The weapons ban was completely intact. Her hands were not classified under any category of the weapons registry. They were biological appendages, standard human equipment, issued at birth, not designed for combat in any legal or taxonomic sense, because the registry covered design tools, and hands are not tools, they are just, according to every piece of documentation in the academy system, hands. She had walked through the collection gate with her hands. She had walked through with her elbows, her knees, her understanding of Grethani joint anatomy, which is not a weapon, it is knowledge, and you cannot confiscate knowledge at a gate. She had walked through with 3 minutes and 42 seconds of demonstrated competence that had apparently been installed in her by a species that, I want to reiterate, invented a sport where two of them stand in a small area and hit each other until one cannot continue. For fun. Voluntarily. The security officer Ossen came to find me later that afternoon. He looked different than he had the last time I had seen him. He looked like a being who had recently updated his threat assessment model. "Your report," he said. "The one about the human." "Yes," I said. "You said she was not concerned about not having weapons." "Correct. Because she did not need weapons." "That is my current understanding, yes." Osun sat down heavily in the chair across from my dormitory desk. He stared at nothing for a moment. "Vreth," he said, "how many humans are enrolled at this academy?" 3, I said. Petra was, a second year named Dao Fel, and a third year named Kira Sund, and none of them surrendered anything at the gate. Nothing, I confirmed. Ossen made a sound that his species uses to express what I believe translates roughly as, I have made a significant professional error. To be fair, I said, the weapons ban was Director Keltu's idea. I am going to need to talk to Director Keltu. Yes, I agreed, you are. The meeting between Ossen and Director Keltu happened the following morning, and I know this because the director's office has windows, and the director's office is on the same corridor as the xenobiology lab, and I happened to be walking past it multiple times that morning, for entirely academic reasons. At one point, Director Keltu pressed both his upper palms flat on his desk in the posture that Pelthians adopt when they are receiving information that is restructuring their foundational assumptions. At another point, he pulled up a file on his desk screen. I could see from the corridor that it was the Galactic survey entry for Earth. He read for a long time. I kept walking. The next development came 4 days later, which is when Director Keltu called a second assembly. The Grand Lecture Bowl filled up again. The same species, the same atmospheric mix, the same terrible acoustics, the same Munther contingent glowing with quiet indignation near the left entrance. Director Keltu stood at the podium. He looked, I thought, like a man who had done a great deal of reading recently, and found the experience instructive in ways he had not anticipated. After review, he said, the Academy's weapons policy is being amended. The Drathaki clicked. The Valori murmured. The Munther collective pulsed. The original policy will remain in effect, he continued, with the addition of the following clarification. All students are reminded that the spirit of the policy is the reduction of threatening behavior and the maintenance of a safe academic environment. Any student found using any means, biological, technological or otherwise, to threaten, intimidate or harm fellow students will face disciplinary review. He paused. Additionally, he said, and here his voice did something complicated, something between dignity and resignation, the Academy will be offering a new mandatory cross-cultural course for all enrolled species. The course is titled Understanding Human Physical Culture, and attendance is not optional. There was a pause in the assembly hall. Then from section 12, row 3, Petra Was raised her hand. Director Keltu looked at her the way that a person looks at an object that has recently demonstrated unexpected properties. Yes, Miss Was, will the course cover other human physical disciplines? She asked. Beyond unarmed combat? I asked because I also have some experience in leverage mechanics, applied material stress, and improvised tool usage. Dead silence. Improvised tool usage, Director Keltu repeated, very carefully. Things that are not designed as weapons, Petra said helpfully, but can function as them under the right circumstances. The director looked at Osen, who was standing to the left of the podium. Osen looked at the floor. We will, Director Keltu said, take that under advisement. Petra nodded pleasantly and wrote something in her paper book. I watched her, from 2 rows back, and I thought about something she had said to me on the observation deck. She had said, most people believe her when she says she has no weapons, and she had said it the way that someone says a fact, not a boast, just a quiet, accurate observation about how the world works. The thing about Petra Was, I had concluded, was not that she was dangerous, although she was, clearly and demonstrably, very dangerous. The thing about Petra Was was that she was patient. She was the kind of dangerous that does not announce itself, does not rattle or spark or vibrate at threatening frequencies. She walked through gates and she smiled small smiles, and she wrote in her paper book, and she was made, down to her skeleton, of 40,000 years of a species that had looked at a world full of things larger and faster and sharper than itself and had said, thoughtfully, well, let us figure this out. They had figured it out. They had figured out an extraordinary number of things, and the weapons ban had not accounted for any of them, because the weapons ban was written by people who thought that danger lives in objects, in things you can hold and weigh and classify and confiscate at a gate. Petra Was had walked through that gate with nothing in her hands, and she had brought everything that mattered. After the assembly, I caught up to her in the corridor outside the lecture bowl. I fell into step beside her, which required some effort because she walks at a pace that is inconsiderate to shorter species. Miss Was, I said. Vreth, she said. I have a question. Go ahead. When Director Keltu announced the weapons ban, I said. You smiled. Did I? You did. And then you wrote something in your book. What did you write? She considered this for a moment. We walked 3 more steps. 5, 7. Then she showed me the book. On the page, in her neat, precise handwriting, in the moment immediately after the director had announced that all weapons were banned, she had written exactly 4 words. Good, it said, even playing field. I stared at that page for a long time. She closed the book, tucked it under her arm, and walked away down the corridor toward the library. She had a slight smile on her face, the small one, the safe one, and somewhere, very deep in the part of my brain that had kept my ancestors alive on Quor 4 for 900,000 years, the ancient alarm that had been ringing since that first assembly finally, quietly, went silent. Not because the threat was gone, but because I understood at last what kind of threat it was. Petra was not dangerous because she could fight. She was dangerous because she had walked into a galaxy full of species larger, faster, and better armed than her, and her first thought, her very first thought upon being told she could not bring weapons, had been, good, even playing field. She was human. The weapons were never the point. They never had been.